pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and do a roll call for both boards.
Sounds good.
Okay, Ann?
Okay, planning commission members, Gonzalez.
Here.
Leonard.
Here.
Richardson. Here. Headley. Here. Walters. Present. And Ferguson is missing, correct? Absent.
Correct.
Who's the only one?
Adventuring out west. They'll be back in 2 weeks.
Board members.
Oh, tomorrow?
Wassam.
All right.
Oh, I missed one. I'm sorry. I missed somebody.
So Sue and Matt Cook and Glenn are not here.
Board members. M. Corte.
Here.
Bartlett.
Yes.
Walters. Present. Brent.
Here.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll take a look at the agenda. Does anybody with the township board have a conflict? And, sir, would you want to, Stephen, you want to come over?
I'm just gonna sit out here awkwardly.
You can, or you can have a comfy chair over here if you'd like.
Come on in.
So anyone from the township board have a conflict of interest with anything on the agenda?
Anyone from the planning commission? Okay, no.
So we'll just do we will have a motion. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda as presented?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Support.
Okay, well, we'll actually do a motion for the, because we're not actually technically a body together, so we'll do one for the board and we'll do one for the planning commission.
I'll support it, so I'll get both votes.
That sounds good. So that is moved by Bartlett, supported by Walters, to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed by no? That passes. And then we turn it to you to do the same.
I presume that we have a motion made by Rhonda, supported by Mindy, for approval of the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, with that, we do have some minutes here. I'll let you take your meeting first there, Dan.
Sure thing. So for the February 4th, which seems like yesterday to me, but any changes, corrections, alterations we need to look at for the planning commission meeting?
I move to accept the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting of February 4th, 2025.
Support.
Thank you. We have a motion by Paul, supported by Steve, for approval of the meeting minutes as presented from February 4th, 2025. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Back to you.
Okay, we have the minutes for the Monday, February 10th regular meeting in front of you. Are there any changes or edits to this draft? And if there are not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, is there support? There's a motion by M. Cortade and support by, you can pick whichever one you want, Ann. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by no? And that motion passes. So we have our minutes done. With that, we can move on to public comment. It is the time for public to come up and let the Planning Commission and the Township Board know your perspective. And I'm looking out and I see a lot of familiar faces, so we'll forego going over the rules. You guys are aware of them. If you'd like to make a comment, please stand up and do so.
I'll kick us off as normal. Judy Nemitz, East Bay Township resident. Thank you for holding these joint meetings. I think it's a great opportunity for the commissioners and for the trustees and for the citizenry to come and collaborate with you all on the direction of the township. So thank you for having these forums. The Ridge property that the trustees did, thank you very much for your support last week on that. It is a beautiful piece of property. If you haven't walked it, please go up there. And once you look at the view, you will take your checkbook out and donate because it is well worth it. That's kind of a segue into the DNR issue with or the things with the state park. I know they're having a forum here, which is very nice of you to offer the Township Hall on the 25th of this month. But I am concerned about the 300 trees being removed and what that does to the percentage of the canopy that was reported during the Beach District meetings. What is the canopy now or what is it going to be estimated as removing those 300 trees? Because the majority of the canopy percentage was located in that state park for the Beach District. So I think it will be important to amend that part of the Beach District thing so we all know how that's going to affect the canopy there. So thank you for doing that. I would like you to look at a possible, we have zoning districts, and it's really nice to have that in a township because different things are allowed in different districts. I'm wondering if the boards would consider like a pilot ordinance for maybe a year or two of maybe considering a dark sky in the lakes area and only have it apply to new builds or remodels that require electrical permitting. And then it can be monitored. So I would like you to maybe look at that and try it in a district and see how it goes. And it doesn't have to be, township-wide, but why not try a pilot study? And lastly, data. Please consider looking at the data of your studies and things you use to make decisions and judgments. I have experienced us using data from 1987 on a traffic study, and also in the economic forecast, there was some data used from 2012. Let me draw an analogy here. It's tax season. I wouldn't like my CPA using a tax code from 2012. I think that would be a problem. So data changes very quickly, especially in the technology field, of which one of the sightings was made. We know that technology changes daily. So please, the public has entrusted in you to make sound decisions based on good data, good judgment, and good skills that we need to make those. So please, try to update that and take that under consideration when making decisions. Thank you very much for your time tonight, and hope you have a great meeting.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Okay, seeing no further public comment, we will move into, well, we have correspondence here. Did we have correspondence in the packet? I don't think we did we? Okay. And then we will move to the business before the board and commission. This is the presentation of the draft Beach District Plan, review and discussion. This is exciting. This has been a culmination of an effort, and just tomorrow, I want to make sure while we have everybody's attention that we do mention that tomorrow at 9 o'clock at Harbor Hall is a meeting with that will be presented, the document will be presented, and also some feedback on that opportunity tomorrow as well. Okay, Claire, would you kick this off with, if it's fine with Dan, with having Claire do a recap at what we're looking at tonight?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So super excited about this presentation. It's the culmination of 9 months of intensive community engagement, and we're very pleased to see, we had hundreds of residents, of business owners, of stakeholders that came out. We had 2 huge community surveys. We had a week-long design charrette. We had a public open house. We had pop-up meetings. We had stakeholder meetings and focus groups. So we really, I think, connected with a lot of key stakeholders and collected a lot of community input. So tonight, we have Beckett and Rader here. They're here to share the draft Beach District Plan with us. And after their presentation, they're also, or as a part of their presentation, going to go into some implementation tools. Because I think, as we've talked about throughout this process, the implementation piece is really critical. And that's part of the reason that the township board set up this beach district implementation team that has been meeting bi-monthly throughout the process to help advise the process, but also thinking really critically about how we can implement this vision and how we can think through financing and partnerships and other types of opportunities to really make sure that we can have a plan that comes to fruition. Because, visionary plans are awesome, but really trying to get something that's implementable is something that we've really been focused on. So just wanted to kind of lay out the process of the plan adoption, what we're looking at. So with our beach district implementation team, they've reviewed this draft plan that's before you tonight. They've made some comments. Beckett Rader has integrated those comments into the report. Tonight, the Township Board and Planning Commission will have the opportunity to review the plan, provide some feedback. We'll also provide some kind of over the next week or so as you continue to dive into the draft plan. We'd love you to continue to send your feedback to myself and to Beckett Rader. Tomorrow morning, as Beth mentioned, we're going to have the presentation to our stakeholder group, as well as kind of a discussion about what are some of those implementation tools. And then we anticipate that this plan will be formally adopted by the Township Board, as the implementation team is a subcommittee of the Township Board. So we anticipate that this plan would be based on feedback and the level of edits that we're looking at would hopefully be adopted in March or April of this year. And then also in talking with Beckett and Rader, we would like to take this make this a sub-area plan of the master plan, because that will really provide a little bit more grounds for some of the zoning changes that are part of the recommendation, looking at some of the streetscape and other types of zoning changes that are coming in this recommendation. So that would be to have this be a sub-area plan or a corridor plan within the master plan. It would require an amendment to the master plan, and that would be like a 42-day public review process, so it's not like a full master plan, but you go through all the steps, and so that would be kind of a formality that we would have the Planning Commission go through, but after the Planning Commission has also the opportunity to provide feedback on it. So,
Claire, can you remind us what is comprised on the implementation team?
yeah, so the implementation team, we have a number of business owners. I think we have 4 different business owners. 2 are hotel owners and managers. We have Swing Theory Golf. We have an assurance company. We also have TART. We have Beta, MDOT, MDNR, Traverse Connect.
Some residents?
We have 2 residents, one Pine Grove, actually 1 in Pine Grove neighborhood and then 2 in the 4 Mile district. Grand Traverse County. I might be forgetting a
Okay,
couple,
that gives us a good
yeah,
refresher.
large group of people.
Is the DOT involved?
MDOT, yes. Yep, we have MDOT representation.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Beckett Rader for the presentation.
Hopefully this all. Now, if something happens with that one, I am going to blame Claire because she's right next to it.
It did work before the meeting. So I'm Sarah with Beckett and Rader, and I worked on this project with the implementation team and all the way through the community engagement process. And I've seen a lot of you at various different times because we've done open houses and presentations throughout the process. So there we go. Maybe a little familiar. So you had the draft in your packet as well as this PowerPoint presentation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time kind of going through all the same information, but leave it open at the end for any comments or questions, and I'll take some notes, and we can work with Claire through that process. So just kind of looking at this project and where it is, you're very familiar with this area. I know it's along 31 between the Bay and Tart Trail, extending from each of the township lines. Looking at that area is calling our beach district. And it is a little bit larger because we wanted to include some of those neighboring residential areas and users that are directly impacted by the 31 corridor there. So as you're familiar, this was a grant-funded project to work on community engagement for this corridor plan. And Claire mentioned the 9-month public visioning process for that. So we talked about a lot of different items through the process, pedestrian because of the TART trail, because of connectivity to the East Bay as being important, so, and pedestrian and non-motorized, I should say, for that. Talked about, beta, all of those different items and components that go into that. And a lot of discussion about getting across 31, which is to be expected. Some of the plan components, you all have the plan in your packet. Again, has the vision, the action plan, and implementation. We did do the background component. It's kind of treated as an appendix after your action plan and implementation. This is where a lot of the information comes from. This is where we talk about the populations, the businesses that are there, the resiliency, some of the natural features that are in the area, just like your master plan, right? To kind of build that backbone to why we're doing this, what the area looks like, and then the community engagement. So as Claire mentioned, we had a couple of different surveys, stakeholder meetings, open houses throughout this whole process for the community engagement. So this is a list of the different opportunities and participants that we, sometimes we had to estimate on for the open house for who was there, but all these touch points that we had with the public throughout the process, looking at it. So with the implementation team, the large survey that went out up front, stakeholder meetings, which were a part of the kind of big charrette week that was in May of 24. And that had the two open houses in that week. Followed that up with an additional survey and those pop-up meetings, taking this experience to where people are, and definitely giving it to Sam. Was out and on the TART trail quite a few different times, trying to get input and make people aware. Going out, we were at Hopscotch. Claire, Sam, and I were out at Hopscotch. Cup of Joe, different businesses that would allow us to come in and interact with people where they are. Also hoping to gain some input from people that may just be visiting the area instead of residents that might not be engaged through the open house process or a different survey. So that was that pop-up, and then the final presentation that kind of talked about the whole community engagement process. So you'll see here community engagement findings and results. Like I said, we've got the TART trail, a lot of talk about public water, beach access, the natural features in the area, connecting it with the state park, even over into Reffitt, because that was a part of the beach district area, restaurants, bars, accessibility. So. And we have all of the full survey results and survey summaries are all in that report that you have as well, so you can dive into it a little bit deeper in the document. So some of the findings, I don't know that there's much here that would surprise you as residents of the community and using this corridor, right? So talking about pedestrian safety, accessibility, crosswalks, restaurants, bars, looking at other types of commercial uses other than hotels or short stays in the corridor. We heard from quite a few people, they want to use the corridor. That's their backyard, perhaps. They live in the neighborhood next door. They do use it, but having more different types of businesses available in that area. But also protecting the natural features that are there. You have Mitchell Creek, the wetlands, that's all a big component, and realizing that that also impacts that corridor in that area. So looking at some recommendations in this area, pedestrian crossings, no surprise, that's at the top. Diverse business types, enhanced infrastructures, looking at connections to the TART trail through the back of businesses, but then also looking at sidewalks, and that's on the north side, kind of down by Tom's, so the northwest part of the corridor, in that neighborhood. And that was one of the during the community engagement, we asked people how they wanted to cross 31, and finding that at Avenue E, there was a big desire to cross right there, and realizing there was a neighborhood there that instead of going out to 3 Mile would like to be able to potentially get across, but then there's no sidewalks once you get across. And that is a difficult area. It's residential, it's very narrow. But all came out in the process of the community engagement. Talking about burying utility lines, huge undertaking, but definitely a part of the whole program. And street trees, looking at the white pine, especially that, that area is kind of known for. One of the components of the second open house was kind of some visual preference, looking at different types of signs, lighting, street plantings. These are kind of the preferred topics, or the preferred choices that came out of each of those. We also did it with kind of the pocket park and bench designs, and kind of looking at different aspects that would be desired. A big component that we talked about in this area were the opportunity sites. There were 3 of them chosen. We discussed with each of the property owners what they were looking at for their property and had them engaged in the process, but then also was able to put this out to the public and refine it further. So we have the 4 Mile road end, looking at creating some sort of a public space with that. That right now is just kind of underutilized, but looking at potentially a pier with some parking, kind of creating this access definitely to the water for the public. Mitchell Creek Inn, looking at what potentially could happen there. Kind of rose to the top is a food truck court of some sort. Could be a great option for that area to provide additional dining opportunities in the area. And then the O'Grady parcel, which now has a big O'Grady for sale sign on it, so everybody knows what we're talking about, but next to, between Dairy Queen and the car wash there, kind of looking at that property, and potentially some sort of a mixed-use building could be there, definitely a connection to the Tart Trail on that property, but these are some of the renderings that we worked through for options of what that site could look like. These aren't saying this is what has to happen here. These are just some visual representation of what it could look like, hopefully to get people thinking, maybe marketing when they're selling their properties, what this could look like there as an opportunity. So then getting into the action plan and implementation, the implementation team really worked through a list of kind of 10 goals for this district and how to move it forward for that. Again, very similar, it's based on this community input that we received about, access to the water, sidewalks, placemaking, everything that's already kind of been talked about. Housing opportunities is one of them that's on this list as well, and including coastal resiliency and natural features as being one of the items as a goal. And then looking into the implementation and different opportunities to help move this corridor forward. And you'll see in the plan, we describe each of these a little bit more, but you're talking about a corridor improvement authority that would have a tax increment financing district related to it, some zoning amendments. One of the items that's in there is that fixtures and furniture guidebook, hopefully drawing on some of those design ideas, the signs that everybody liked, or the benches, but providing an opportunity for kind of public and private. The township can put in benches, but a hotel or a restaurant may use the same benches in the public space, or beta or something, to kind of create this look that can be used throughout the corridor in development. And then looking at grant opportunities, you're very familiar with grants. They're a great way to move things forward, usually limited in scope in certain items. Also, you do have the management and the administration for those grants, so that's another thing to consider through the process. So just briefly to talk about a corridor improvement authority, this is an entity that's established by the township, and it's based on a plan, which is what you have. This plan that we have developed, and hopefully we'll go through the adoption process, would be your your district plan for this area. And you can see here the municipality has to take several steps to create this. So this is just an idea of something to help move this forward. It does allow for the capture of the TIF dollars then to help fund improvements just in this area. And so I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with how tax increment financing works. But essentially, you establish your base tax year, and then you capture the growth of that tax base. And so this graphic hopefully helps to describe that a little bit. So anybody that's currently collecting a tax, you collect that same amount. It's the additional generated tax that's put into the TIF, and then that money is spent back in that district. It's used back in that district to help move different components forward. It could be as simple as these benches that you want to implement, street lighting. You know, where's that money come from the township to be able to put into that corridor and improve those placemaking items? It could be larger items. Could be another bridge across the highway, you know, or a tunnel or something like that, which will definitely take more time and years, but that's all part of the process and the plan that you can go through to help generate that placemaking for that corridor.
Sarah, just for clarification, for someone who might be watching or might be watching at a later date, the current taxing authorities would not go backwards in the revenue they receive, would not lose revenue, correct?
Yes, yes. So everybody, you know, right now, if you collect $100, everybody continues to collect the $100. It's the additional. So when the taxes go up by $50, it's that $50 that goes back into the TIF. So everybody is whole still. It's just that additional amount that would go into and be able to be used just in that district instead of having to be spread throughout the whole area.
Thank you.
So looking at zoning amendments and potential opportunities for that, I know there's already been some discussion because you just got through a zoning ordinance update anyways, but some additional items that could be done for zoning amendments, talking about the form-based codes, streamline approval process, and then kind of the sustainability requirements that you could put into the zoning ordinance. So these are ideas. This isn't saying this is happening tomorrow. These, just like your master plan, right? You're putting these thoughts or future discussions that the Planning Commission and the township is going to have as potential amendments to move forward. So I kind of talked about the guidebook already, but providing this tool to the business owners, to the township, so everybody has this cohesive look. And then, like I said, you're all familiar with grant opportunities for specific projects, you know, within the corridor, but they are all competitive and they are specific. So a lot of the items that kind of came out of the community engagement are currently outside of grant opportunities typically, but you never know what'll come along as something. So needing to look at additional funding mechanisms to be able to help move this plan forward. So I don't know if anybody has any additional questions, just specifically about maybe what I talked about, but then we could get into any questions, comments on the plan itself.
Feel free, any questions? I think there's for anyone watching, the lack of questions does not mean the lack of interest. We've been, you know, going through this process for a number of months and learning, you know, through the process. So, and had many opportunities to ask questions as you've shown there, because we were involved in some of the public engagement process as well. So that week during May was very busy, and it was pretty interesting and exciting to hear the public coming to that process and offering feedback.
Yeah, and that was really part of the process, is getting input, but then going back and saying, did we hear what you had to say? Are we on the right track? And so it provided a lot of opportunities for individuals to be involved. And if they couldn't make one opportunity to be involved, there was another one that came along that input could be received at.
Claire?
And thank you, Sarah, for that overview. I just also wanted to highlight, it was kind of unique to have 2 large federal grants to be able to dedicate towards this effort. So in addition to all of this work that Beck and Rader has done through the visioning process, we've also been able to use the funds to host quarterly breakfasts. So I think that that's been really nice for corridor stakeholders, business owners to get together on a regular basis, and there's information sharing. We had emergency responders, we had MEDC and Venture North talking about different financing and business support opportunities. So it's really been nice to have kind of these opportunities for networking and just business owners getting to know each other and talking and sharing information. And then we also were able to use the funding, as many of you are aware, for kind of the branding. So we were able to work with the firm Flight Path Creative to develop the Beach District logo with input from stakeholders, as well as the brochures that I'm sure many of you have seen. They're out and about along the corridor, creating a website, like a business directory that kind of features all of the businesses along there and allows them to use that for their promotion. So the banners, the signage, bookending the district. So that was what we heard from the business owners, is like the low-hanging fruit. Like, this is something that you can implement now that would help us and help support us and help start to create this sense of identity where, you know, we know long-term, we know long-term we want to get to a point where we're, you know, making these large infrastructure investments, but it's been kind of a cool opportunity to be able to start like actually doing a few little projects that are noticeable and start to get people excited about the district.
And Sarah, just to be clear, we move forward with this plan. We are not officially adopting a CIA. We're not officially adopting a new TIF plan. Can you kind of walk through what those additional steps look like?
Sure, and actually, I'm going to turn it over to John Michaelangeli. He works a lot in corridors, establishing that corridor improvement authority, and can kind of set up kind of the step-by-step. You are correct. You're not creating it today, you know, when you adopt this plan, you're not creating it. There's additional steps that need to be done by the township before that could move forward, if that's an option that you want to go through.
Always just a good point of clarity.
Can I just say, while John's coming up, I can remember years and years ago when we attempted to go through the same thing, and we weren't near as organized, and appreciate all the work that you guys put into this, because, I mean, when I look back to when we were talking about it the first time, that I was here anyway, I think of all the benefits we could have had between then and now, and I think it's a good opportunity and a good tool to use to move this area forward, so.
Good evening. Regarding implementation, corridors are a very specific type of redevelopment effort because they're very linear and there's not a lot of depth. So instead of the development is going to happen along the corridor. But the 2 primary components, one is public and the other one's private. The private sector brings the capital infusion into real estate development and redevelopment. On the public side, it's a combination of 3 or 4 different components. Sarah mentioned them. The first is having a vision and a plan that has stakeholder involvement and input and consensus. That's critical. And this is what this document is. And we're suggesting that part of this process would be eventually the Planning Commission would go through the adoption process as a sub-area plan as part of the master plan. And then the question is after that, well, why do that? Well, because one of the things I think is important would be that once it's adopted as part of this, as a sub-area plan, that the township then has the standing basically to create, and I would recommend, East Bay Beach District zoning district. And that district would be based on the corridor, based on the vision, based on the different concepts in land development that you want to see in terms of hotels, restaurants, multifamily, different types of housing, and public improvements and private improvements. So that can be integrated. That's a regulatory component on the public side. One of the interesting things that can be done from a regulatory point of view, which really doesn't get a lot of pushback from the development community, is having a standardized guidebook or set of improvements, lighting, benches, landscaping, because the idea is you want the improvements in the corridor not only to be in the public right-of-way, but you want them to extend into the properties. And that can be easily done because when somebody builds a hotel, they're going to light their parking lot. It'll be up to the architect to select the light, but if the township has a guidebook and says, here are the lighting styles that we prefer, the chances are pretty good they're going to integrate those into their site plan. If you have a palette of landscaping materials that you want to use, I know that I think the white pine is something that's very indigenous to this area. They'll follow that, and I've seen it happen. Well, they're happy. They know that they're going to have to light their parking lots. They know they're going to have to landscape. Many larger developments know that they're going to have things like outdoor furnitures and benches and fire pits today. Take a look at some of the new hotels. So they don't have a problem integrating those amenities into their properties, which then really starts to integrate the district. And that's even before you implement a corridor improvement authority that has tax increment financing. Because the other part of the public component is the investment in infrastructure that goes into the district. And that's done through the corridor improvement authority. And the way to do that is through the tax increment financing, which is not a new tax on property. It's a reallocation of where their taxes go. So as the valuation improves within the district, that amount of money is reinvested back into the district until the projects are completed. And when they're completed, then the increment goes away, and then everybody benefits from the investment. I've always had the question posed to me by other taxing authorities, what's in it for me? Well, what's in it is when you have a viable downtown, when you have a viable business district, like here at the East Bay Beach District, the other taxing authorities benefit from the residual development that happens outside of the district. So as if you have a viable downtown, for example, a viable business district here, people will want to buy the property, houses, close by for the walkability and the connectivity. So the taxing authorities may be giving up a little bit in the district itself, but they're actually leveraging more investment because the area is becoming more viable and the overall tax base increases. So on the public side, it's a combination of regulation, combination of vision, combination of capital improvements, and then the last thing that I want to emphasize, regardless if you do tax increment financing or not, you should create a corridor improvement authority, because then you appoint a board where the majority of the members are property owners with the district. So you have an organizational structure just like you have now. Claire has an implementation committee. A CIA is a form of implementation committee where there is a common focus on the corridor itself by the property owners that have investment in the corridor. So you can have a CIA. You don't necessarily have to have the TIF part of it, but you have to have an organizational structure. So that's the public side. The private side brings the dollars. The public side brings the regulation, the vision, and the organizational structure in order to make the partnership work. The other component which is important here is that Claire has done a great job of bringing other public agencies into this process. So you have MDOT, you have DNR, you have BETA, you have TART, you have the Chamber of Commerce. So they've all been part of this process, and we've pulled together their input as well, because individually they will do projects on their own, and you want those projects to be part of the greater vision. So since everybody's been part of creating the plan, I think it'll be easier for everybody to take their little piece of it and implement it so it looks cohesive and it's pulled together. So that's the beauty of this process that you've gone through. It's been a lot of, I know that Sarah and Claire have done a lot of community engagement, a lot of meetings, a lot of stakeholder meetings, but trust me, that investment in time will be worth a lot going into the future in terms of people having ownership into the plan and its successful implementation.
John, I think, as we mentioned, the Planning Commission and the Township Board have been apprised of the Beach District process as we've gone through it. I guess I would see if anyone on either board or commission has any questions for John, as he's been involved with the financing part of it. So we haven't talked as much about the financing piece of it, and he's been so critical in other jurisdictions doing this and doing it successfully. It's a good opportunity for some expertise. Sure, Paul, go ahead.
The question I have, it really is a couple of questions within, but let's talk about accountability. When you have a CIA, the accountability of the CIA to whom? That's one. How that mechanics work. Number two is that within the designated area, does other organizations or parts of the East Bay government give up certain abilities or authorities, such as the Planning Commission? Would they still be able to meet or decide as to new developments within that area, or is that now cordoned off to that planning group or the CIA group itself?
Great questions, Paul. The first question is, organizationally, the Corridor Improvement Authority is appointed by the Board of Trustees. And the state statute requires that a majority of the members have to have a property interest in the corridor, either owning or leasing property. The supervisor, who is the chief elected officer, by statute sits on the board of the CIA unless they designate somebody within the administration to take that position.
We haven't talked about that one now, John. Let's back up.
The Planning Commission still has its responsibilities. That's why we're recommending that the district report be adopted by the Planning Commission as part of the master plan as a sub-area plan. Hopefully, the Planning Commission would see the benefit of creating a special zoning district to help implement the plan. So when developments come in, those developments would have to be reviewed by the Planning Commission just like any other development. The CIA's focus is organizationally in terms of implementation, but it has to rely on other entities to implement. So Planning Commission's involved in the planning and zoning, site plan review. They would have to rely on Beta, obviously, for public transportation. There would have to be some involvement by MDOT when you're talking about transportation improvements, pedestrian crossings. So everybody still has their statutory involvement in the corridor. No one loses any involvement, or responsibility isn't shifted away from any group. The CIA is just kind of like the organization umbrella whose sole mission is to implement the development plan, which you have here in front of you. That's their task, is the implementation and bringing in their respective partners to help implement it.
Who approves any project that they come up with?
Township Board. Yeah. The CIA, like a downtown development authority, like a local development finance authority, they are the development arm of the Township Board, just like the Planning Commission. So the board members they're recommended by the supervisor, approved by the board. The development plan, the annual budget of the CIA is approved by the Board of Trustees every year. Typically in local government, the authority's budget would be audited with the township's audit. So they get audited, they have to follow the same governmental standards relative to expenditures of funds. So they're really the development arm of the township board. They're not, township doesn't create them and say, okay, go off and do your thing. There is definitely checks and balances on an annual basis between the CIA and between the Board of Trustees. Board of Trustees appoints, the Board of Trustee approves the budget, the Board of Trustees have to approve the projects.
And that appointment process, as John describes it in statute, is literally identical to what we do for a planning commission. And also, as far as the projects being approved by the township board, that's very similar to what we do, say, for example, with the Parks Commission. They have projects that they want to do that are based on their public engagement and their rec plan. They look at implementing those, determine the budget, and then put them into their budget or offer a recommendation to the township board, which then approves.
Yes. Any other?
Great questions.
I have a question. So, just so I'm clear on, I've heard you say a couple times about how, if I'm hearing this right, that we should implement a zoning ordinance for the beach district. Are we talking about something completely separate from our current zoning ordinance?
It would be an amendment to your zoning code. I mean, our recommendation would be you have a plan that's got a specific vision, and in the plan, it talks about a variety of uses. It would be a great opportunity to have a zoning district that follows the boundaries of the district here, and then within that, you would have your regulated uses, and then that's where you would integrate into the code the connection between the zoning and the guidebook for improvements on private property. Okay, so that's how you kind of bolster the regulatory framework that way. But it would,
Kind of like an overlay district, like the Forest Lakes overlay?
yeah, it could be that too. You could have an,
I mean, I'm just trying to compare.
yeah, you could either have it as a regular district, you could have it as an overlay.
And as an example, Renee, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, we talked a little bit at the end of our zoning ordinance rewrite about, in this district, we've heard many times from the public, they'd like to have the beach district be someplace to go to as a resident, as well as just traveling through it. And so we talked about, and was coming back to the planning commission, looking at the zoning ordinance, that any future commercial development in that district have a public place component of it. And so that might be the type of thing where you would do a zoning ordinance for that part. That might be a component of the zoning ordinance for that district.
Yeah, you could either do it as a distinct district, or you could do it as an overlay. But, like I mentioned, on the public side, you have to use a combination of different tools. One is zoning and regulation, one is capital improvements, for example, and the other one is organizational skills. Yeah.
Claire, did I interrupt you?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. You know, I think that our approach with Planning Commission and some of the zoning amendments will be simplified a little bit, just because we already have the regional business district, which is all of the commercial properties along that corridor. So I think we've got that geographical boundary pretty well delineated. And so it's really just taking a look, as John mentioned, about some of the design guidelines, some of the standards, making kind of that visual look and feel consistent, as well as like what Beth mentioned with some of the other. So I anticipate it would be more like small zoning amendments.
Sure.
That could help fulfill the vision.
Last piece from me, John, is tied to financing. So we talk about all the different wants, desires, improvements that we want to see happen through there. Let's say we establish this district. It's probably not going to generate a ton of income overnight. It's going to take a few years, right, to create any type of amount of money that would be used for any of these projects. Are there other opportunities that are afforded to a CIA in terms of bonding, in terms of economic development, that are unique outside of the traditional investments from, say, the township?
The CIA doesn't have the authority to bond the township would have to bond, but the CIA pledges its revenues to pay for the bonds. So that's how they do it, okay? And it's the same thing with the Downtown Development Authority. You forecast the revenues, the township levies a bond for the improvements, and then the CIA has an agreement with the township within the bond prospectus that the revenues that come into the CIA make the interest and the principal payment. And that's how they work it.
So that's how they would afford the upfront cost, because some of these things are pricey.
Yeah. There's other things that, and without getting too much into the weeds, because I don't want you coming away thinking that the only way to implement this vision is through a corridor improvement authority. That's just one of the tools that are available. But there are, like, for example, there's a special assessment district that can be done. There's what's the state, there's a statute called the principal shopping district, which can be implemented. There's the business improvement district, which is another statute that can be used. But probably the most effective and easiest one to implement is a corridor improvement authority. But corridor improvement authority does a couple of things. The increment revenues that it collects can be used as the local match for grants. Okay, so like with DNR, there may be a 25% grant, our local match, or maybe you want to throw in more money, let's say 35% to get a higher score. It's not uncommon that you have CIAs and DDAs that pledge, if the project is in the district, they put in the local match, so the township, you can use its funds in other areas. There's Corridor Improvement Authority has the ability, as long as it's addressed in the plan, to acquire property. If it's part of the, it's going to be part of the public, it's part of the development plan. It has the ability in some communities, the CIA or the Downtown Development Authority is the one that puts the upfront money into pre-development costs in terms of phase 1 and phase 2 environmental studies. Sometimes if they have a large piece of property and they want to work with a developer, it's not uncommon that they put some of the upfront money to do a charrette in order to kind of create the concept along with the public on how the property be redeveloped, which is part of the development process. So there's a lot of different techniques that can be integrated that a CIA can do that really helps both public and private sector move the plan forward.
And there is the ability for an individual property owner to do land bank, brownfield, and to have tax increment financing with that. We had one hotel that was looking at doing that, and what it would have afforded them is to do their upfront, like their stormwater and some additional like green features, be reimbursable through the tax increment financing. Additionally with that, we would have been able to get some public infrastructure paid for through the very same thing. The problem is, well, it's not a problem, but the fact is that then it's only on the neighboring property, like only what's right around that parcel. And so if you rely on that solely, along that whole corridor, you're going to get very hit or miss development and improvement because there's no cohesiveness with that funding. You have to have a willing developer. You have to have projects that are needed right there. Versus, some of these improvements are something that span the corridor.
Yeah, and you want to be somewhat strategic in terms of when you create it. Because if you wait until most of the development is done, the increments are going to be very small. Okay, for example, back in 1986, I worked with the city of Trenton on creating their Downtown Development Authority. And today, they bring in $1.4 million a year. Okay, and they do some serious level public infrastructure projects with that money in the community. But that's why they call it increment, because over a period of time that increment increases as the redevelopment and development takes place. But you've got to be strategic on when you put that in place so you don't miss that opportunity to garner that revenue stream. So, you've got projects that that are coming in the pipeline. You want to be strategic about when you put it in place to maximize that leverage.
So we should not be frustrated with hoteliers that are taking 3 years to complete a hotel.
No, I wouldn't. No.
Right. I'm just a joke. We do have one lengthy construction process, and they have their own issues. I didn't mean to throw Barb or anything. It's just kind of comical to us locals who are like, wow, that's slowly coming along. And when we say slowly, we mean slowly. Yes.
I don't know who this is for, I think it's for Claire, but what does this do to our redevelopment ready communities package?
It's a requirement, no, not the Corridor Improvement Authority, but this corridor plan is a requirement of our RC. And so, actually, I might punt that over to John or to Dan, just in terms of, as we get our RC certified, we open ourselves up to more dollars that can be reinvested in public-private partnerships to help support developments, and MEDC can kind of come in and help with some of that initial legwork to make redevelopments more feasible. But with a Corridor Improvement Authority, could potentially have some additional benefits to us.
I think long-term, yes, because of let's say we take one of these sites that we've identified and they bring in someone who's looking for some financial assistance, whether that's through MISTA or MEDC or anyone for that matter. The CIA, as John alluded to, is kind of if it's built into the plan, it's a nice way for there to be some type of local contribution mechanism that's already built in. It's like, we don't have to argue about. It's been defined as a way that you're going to contribute to things such as improving a 4-inch line to a 10-inch line to make this site buildable for a larger development, or a way to do public infrastructure as a way to complement what was already going to happen there privately, but you're showing financial contribution to that project from the state. So it's kind of like a good way to ready a site for private investment by not making the private sector pay for things like sidewalks or water filtration systems that are on site or connections to the TART trail. We can identify those in the plan. They can be built into that. It's just a cleaner way, I would say, long-term, as far as if a community wants to participate in private sector deals, because we require there to be some type of match. MISTA sometimes does, depends on the program, but pretty much every time that the MEDC looks at one, we require.
A few other just, smaller projects that I could envision using Corridor Improvement Authority revenue. One item that we've heard over and over again is just clearing the sidewalks, a desire for the sidewalks to be plowed in the wintertime. So that's one example of using some of that funding to help with that. Another example is with Refit. There's always been, desired to have a connection from Refit to the TART trail over to the Beach District. So helping with that railroad crossing. So those are just some examples of some of the public infrastructure that I think could, they're kind of small projects, but they could have really big impacts and kind of transformative to the district and just to the locals that are using it and kind of trying to navigate through the district.
One other thing too, the economic development strategy that the EDC through the county is looking at with the assistance of Traverse Connect and the county community development coordinator. It also outlines, and we'll be seeing that at some time in the future, I'm not sure exactly when, but it also outlines some of the benefits and of having corridors throughout the county defined as well, so. Other comments or questions? Claire, anything else you want to clarify or present or with John or Sarah?
I don't think so. I think I was hoping tonight to just kind of take a temperature from the board and planning commission, one, on just the overall plan, and would definitely welcome and encourage you to send specific comments, typos, anything like that. Please send along to Sarah and myself. If you don't have Sarah's email, I think is on here, but you can send it to me and I can make sure Sarah receives that, so that we can make sure we get all of your feedback in the plan. And then also just was interested in kind of just taking a temperature on kind of first reactions to some of the implementation tools, specifically the Corridor Improvement Authority.
I think Tracy kicked that off a little bit with her history with the township.
It's been a long time coming.
And Dan, you have a lot of professional industry experience with this.
We've used it selectively in appropriate places, I would say, around the state. I think for a place like this, I think I haven't been that quiet about it. We've seen a lot of new investment in that corridor, right? And I think there's still a lot to come. So from a positioning standpoint, with the requests and the desires that we've heard people talk about in that area, it always comes back in my mind is like, okay, that sounds great, but how are we going to pay for it? And again, that's kind of why I'm really happy that all of this is taking place and participating in a lot of these meetings. You hear it from folks that they wanted. It's not like there's three of us that are, creating this. It's been very publicly noisy in a positive way.
Renee or Rhonda or Stephen or Paul, do you have anything else to add or support or not support or whatever? Dan's comments?
I truly think that building of the CIA gives us a foundation for a number of mechanisms, TIF maybe, if we decide to go in that direction. I think we need to talk about it in greater detail, but I definitely think that this would be the way to move forward.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just the fact that by creating a focus group on the development, things don't get forgotten. We just don't shelve the report and say, isn't that nice? You actually have some group who's now concentrating on making those developments. So I think that's a positive move.
Sure. Okay, how about from the Township Board? Tracy, you had spoken up, but Mindy or Matt?
Straight. How's that?
Yeah, I think I think you're hearing some definite interest because we see the tools that John is mentioning and how much further it will move the area forward in creating not only commercially economic viable, which that's there, it's not going anywhere, but also more viable community for the residents who live here. And, things like Claire mentioned with plowing the snow, I've priced that out because I don't like that they're not plowed. And that is a budget buster. So where do you get that funding from? It's incredibly expensive to have done on any amount of routine that keeps them cleared regularly and safely. So that could definitely be a process that could bring some small things, but as you mentioned, bring big improvements. So I think it's worth taking a look into. I do think we have to be really conscious of making people understand that we don't have some of the comments that sometimes come along with CIAs and that sort of a mechanism. Like you might hear people say, "Oh, they're taxing me more." No, that's not the case. So or taxing authorities are losing money. Nope, that's not the case either. So really having some good tools for communication, which I think that we're set up to do, will be critical. Well, thank you very much. Claire, thank you for your work. Becca and Rader, thank you for your work and your expertise.
Yeah, and like Claire said, please send along any comments, questions that you have. We can get those into the plan before the Township Board and the Planning Commission are doing their adoptions. So.
Sounds good. Have a great meeting tomorrow morning, and if you're able to make it, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning at Harbor Brook Hall. So with that, we'll move.
Breakfast and coffee.
Bribery.
Paid for by grant funds. with that, we'll move on to the second agenda item, septic policy options. And Claire, I'm going to let you kick that off and introduce our guests.
So the septic has been, it was included in the Erie Township Master Plan. It was a high priority, and I know a number of planning commissioners and board members have continued to bring it up as a high priority. So the action was enact an ordinance for septic inspections at certain frequency or time of sale to protect water quality. So over the last couple of years, East Bay Township staff has had many conversations with county health department, with county leaders, with environmental advocates. We've talked with Watershed Council and others to better understand kind of what some of the different various policy options are. There's a lot of policy options. But, you know, concurrently, as the state was looking at a statewide sanitary code, Grand Traverse County has, as many of you are aware, has also been having kind of internal discussion and have created an ad hoc committee aimed at developing a on-site wastewater and sewage disposal regulation. So Beth and I have attended some of those meetings along with other township representatives, and I think one huge benefit of this first step is just to have a consistent regulation across the entire county. It's really challenging, I'm sure from the health department's perspective, to administer something different for every community. And I think that there's, from what I've heard, there's a lot of communities right now that are interested in hearing from their constituents that this protection is important. So it's exciting to have kind of a cohesive, coordinated approach. And I've got Mike Leahy and Brent Wheat both here from the health department, so I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Claire. And I'm speaking to the mic for recording, right? But I do have a loud voice, so I'll stand back to save our ears tonight. Good evening, Board and Commission. Mike Leahy, Deputy Health Officer at Grand Traverse County Health Department. With me, as Claire mentioned, I have Brent Wheat, he is our Environmental Health Director at the County Health Department. Brent is here really as our subject matter expertise on-site wastewater and some of the language within the proposed regulation that we have. I'll start by kind of giving a big picture perspective as to where we are as a county and as a county department. So again, thank you, Claire, for the invite. So timing is everything, I believe, right? So late last week, our board asked us to present tomorrow at the regular session Board of Commissioner meeting on this subject. So not to put the cart before the horse, and also not to speak for our board, where tomorrow they will be able to speak and discuss on this once we give an update as to potential steps that we may take. So I felt like maybe it was a good time to just talk about that as well, to give an update to the township here. So as Claire mentioned, conversations started well into the spring of last year, 2024. There was proposed statewide legislation that was set to come down on the entire state and require inspections of all on-site wastewater systems across the state under a cadence, every 5 years and then 10 years, and it was going to be quite the lift. Ultimately, in the lame duck session last year, that legislation failed to pass. So Lansing is kind of back to the starting point with that, with having to have someone bring forth the new bill and it make its way through the House and the Senate. So our conversation at the county started for a number of reasons. It's been an active conversation in the county since I started at the health department 12 years ago. And also just looking at that statewide legislation, it was heavy. There was a lot of local health departments expressing across the state concern around just what it would take to implement a legislation like that, on a cadence like that, what it would take to increase the workforce to do that, what it would put on Michigan taxpayers across the state. There were concerns that eventually local health departments were brought to the table to give feedback on that bill. And towards the end, we started to see some changes that had started to really address some local concerns. but ultimately, it didn't make its way through that lame duck session. But within there was also language about counties that have an ordinance in place that addressed on-site wastewater regulation. There was a sunsetting period. We had an opportunity to put something in place that was much more attainable at a local county level across all of our townships potentially. And that would then grant us an opportunity to push back that statewide legislation while we kind of assessed what the needs were. So kind of a balanced approach, stepping into regulation of on-site wastewater systems, but not having to kind of sprint out of the gate with that Lansing legislation that we were looking at. So ultimately, as the year progressed, like I said, that failed to move forward in Lansing, but we continued the conversation locally at the county level after much work was done. So this conversation officially started at a board level in July of 2024. That was a regular session in which an ad hoc committee was formed, as Claire mentioned, and that committee met 3 times. And we had township representation, we had Board of Commissioner representation, local health department, and also some private entities such as, correct me, Aspire or Aspire North, right? They just changed their name. I can never keep it straight. As well as some private industry, local pumpers and haulers. We did have some great representation across that, as well as some community action agencies, and then just community residents who presented. So at the end of that 3rd ad hoc session, we had produced a rough draft of a draft regulation that then we ran through our legal team through 2 renditions after that. And what that ended up boiling down to was a time of transfer regulation, really. So we started to hone in on what we thought were potentially our most critical public health concerns as to why are we doing this work, right? What is the point here? And that was potential contaminants approaching on-site, surface water. So that was lakes, streams, and rivers. With that, we started to build out a time of transfer that was applicable to parcels where the dwelling was within 300 feet of that surface body of water, whether it be a lake, stream, or river. So we presented on January 22nd to our board at the county in a study session that draft regulation. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we will be presenting to the board in regular session, so where they may be able to make a motion if they so choose to do so. And that would potentially push this process forward. And what does that mean? That means that as the county, we would have to schedule a public hearing around this regulation. That public hearing would have to be posted 10 days prior. The notice would have to be posted 10 days prior to the hearing taking place and 20 days prior to that regulation being adopted. So tomorrow, that conversation is to be had at the county at 9 a.m. at 400 Boardman. That's kind of where I'm at from a health department as a whole. If Mr. Weed has anything in terms of specifics on the 300 feet or anything, or welcome to questions.
Yeah. You guys want me to talk, or you have questions?
Go ahead, Brent, if you want to cover any
Yeah, I can
territory.
speak a little bit more to the 300 feet. So the statewide code, what made it so difficult was that they set priorities around when those inspections had to be done. And that priority was all based on distances to drain fields and septic systems. Unfortunately, we don't have x-ray vision, and we don't know where a lot of those are exactly. So this regulation kind of allows us to start to build out that database to be able to pinpoint. So then if the state decides to move forward with a regulation where they're talking about distances of drain fields to water, then we'll have that a better idea of where those exist. That's
Okay.
why we chose dwelling over septic system locations.
Okay, sounds good. Go ahead.
I was going to ask how you picked 300 feet. Why not 500? Why not something else?
So we actually started with 500 feet, and really that revolved around consistency with some of our other codes. We run soil erosion too, and that's Part 91 revolves around 500 feet to surface water. And so we picked 500 feet, but through the ad hoc committee meetings, they made the motion to change it to 300 just to push forward something that's a little more obtainable, that we're looking at roughly 200 to 400 inspections a year within that 300 foot. And if we jump to the 500 feet, it balloons up to about 600 inspections. And the concern right now is utilizing third-party inspectors, and there's not a huge list of those right now. So we're hoping that we can kind of dive in a little bit and help build out that infrastructure and private inspectors, and then possibly grow down the road.
Brent, how about the criteria and standards for the inspection? I remember when we were going through short-term rentals, we could not get a real clear, concise criteria for inspection from either those who do the inspections, whether it was the state or the county, anyone really on what they would consider an appropriate inspection.
So we're going to build out a lot of those guidelines, and we're going to have a certification program. So all of our inspectors will go through some type of certification process that will help build out that criteria. Our hope is to build out forms that the inspectors just fill out our form. That way we have kind of a standard across the board for inspectors and some consistency.
Okay, so that is the intention that that would happen after the county board would pass this?
Yeah, so we
Okay.
still have to create kind of our guidelines
Okay.
around the actual running of the program, procedures. So there's a lot of work still to do.
Okay, understand.
So to clarify that too, right? So there's a step of adopting and then implementing, right? So there's those formal steps. So even when adopted at the county, within the regulation is an effective date. So as of right now, we've set an effective date of January 1st of 2026. Because there's a lot, to Brent's point, guidelines in there, inspection program criteria. This was not in our 2025 Health Department budget, so we have to go through a budget process, a staffing plan. This isn't a current program at the Health Department. This would be building a new program within the Environmental Health Division. So we did work to give ourselves enough runway to do that effectively. Again, I don't want to put the cart before the horse here. From my position, it's March in a couple weeks. So even that's a lot of work to be done between now and January 1st of 2026.
So, Mike, the county staff then will not be doing the inspections, it will be the third party. What kind of staffing are you looking at to implement this and to maintain it?
Yep, so we will be asking for 1.0 FTE to act as a coordinator over this program, right? So there will be a third-party inspector model implemented here. The health department receives those inspections. If it's a pass, that coordinator will continue on with that pass. If it's a failure, there will likely be a on-site inspection again to kind of confirm that, a confirmatory work by the health department before it clearly is identified as a failure, and then a need to address between those two parties, right? Because again, we're talking about time of transfer. So there's, and that's not our work, right? I'm very adamant about us not inserting ourselves in that private industry practice. I don't want to become a barrier to that. So working under those guidelines that, again, it's between those two parties to show the health department that how this is going to be addressed.
Okay. Paul, you had some
Yeah,
questions?
I have two questions. The first is on the certificate, and it jumped out at me that they have to, whoever is doing the inspection would have to have an annual reinstatement of their, is that kind of a short period? Isn't that kind of, why not like a certificate for 3 years or something of that nature? Why annual?
Yeah, we could look at something like that. That's just what the ad hoc committee decided to pursue, so.
Yeah, it almost seemed like a disincentive that people would have to say.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would think like 3 years would be a thing. The other thing is on the exceptions, where you have inspection except, and one of them I just didn't understand. What is a life lease or a life estate?
It's like a lady
That's,
bird.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like a
Would-
lady
It's
bird.
like a ladybird deed, right?
Okay, so then also, what would be exempted would be a transfer due to a foreclosure from real property tax or a transfer or redemption of estate tax, or tax sale, I should say. It seems at that point, that's a transfer. Eventually, when those things happen, there would be a transfer. So at some point, is there inspections of these properties?
So, good question. That would likely be picked up in the next step, right? So when it's, for example, a foreclosure taken by the bank and then for sale, or, when the bank goes to sell that property, then that's the trigger at that point. The language in which you're referencing, I'm glad you brought it up. So we're not the first to step into this across the state, right? So in southeast Michigan, there's a number of counties in which have programs such as these. So we did kind of steal the language a little bit and apply it to where we felt it was most applicable to us to see what works and what doesn't work, right? That's the kind of benefit here. But my understanding of that is that it would be caught on the second half of that, is when that property goes to sale, when the bank looks to move that property and there's a new name on that title, that's where that would occur.
Okay. Yeah, I just,
Yep,
Yeah,
good question.
I always look for
It's-
loopholes.
I appreciate this opportunity in preparation for tomorrow morning, so fire them away.
Well, the best,
Sorry, but, so you said something about the southeast Michigan having several, well, we've got several counties right around us that are already doing it.
Yep.
I would imagine we look closely at that as well.
Exactly. There are a number of townships that have different language, right? We spoke with a few of them locally, and Torch Lake has one. Benzie Leelanau District Health Department has something over those two counties, Kalkaska County. So we work closely with Benzie Leelanau District Health Department on all things. So we've had a number of meetings with them to learn what worked, what didn't work, in that type of approach, talking about really what does the FTE need here for this work, right? So, yeah, we looked across the state really since last spring, early 2024. This conversation was really happening internally late 23 into 24. Our board didn't make it an actual conversation in front of them until July. But we have some, in Macomb County is a county that uses third-party inspections in a very similar type model, right? So while talking through all of them about where's the pros and cons between third-party or building our workforce up to do, we had initial projections at the state legislature language with the amount of, 1,800, 2,000 inspections a year. I mean, we were looking at adding 5 to 6 FTEs to the local health department at that time, and I would
so was
prefer-
every other county.
Yep, so I wasn't a big fan of that, really. So, again, I think this is a good balanced approach of kind of stepping into it across the county, so.
I like personally the third party because I've been in real estate almost 20 years and I've dealt with Benzie Leelanau on inspections, and I feel sometimes that, I would say this nicely because it'll be recorded. Sometimes those positions get, I don't know, maybe they go to their head, but they don't make it that easy to work with them. at least if you got third party, you kind of have some say on who you work with.
Yep.
I know Butch Straight is a phenomenal
Yep.
inspector, and I trust that man more than anybody. And I've asked him to go and back up what I'm being told by the county, because I didn't have good faith that what I was being told was really what it was.
Yeah.
And I got a whole different perspective on it. So that's just my 2 cents. I think that working with third parties is
Yeah.
still, as long as they're certified and they're doing, the guidelines, it gives people a little bit more confidence that they can work with someone.
I think we took a lot of that into consideration. It's easy to say we're different, right? That's the easy thing to say. But, we kind of are in Grand Traverse County, right? When we look at our immediately adjacent counties to us, our throughput is different in terms of transactions in the county, to the previous conversation you all were having, right? Our infrastructure is different than our adjacent counties, so really trying to listen to everyone across the state and identify what was going to work for us was really big, because again, I do not want to put our department up for failure. I do not want to put our department into the private industry process of holding back sales and all of that matters, so positioning us correctly is very important to me.
So to add to Paul's conversation, so the certification of the inspector right now, you've got that as an annual process. That'll be new training, new updates. He thinks that might be a little too tight of a time frame. I don't think I'd go too much further. I mean, 2 years. My professional license renews every 2 years. And I have to do, 30 hours of CE and do a bunch of different requirements. So I would recommend not going too far.
How about 2.5?
I wish mine were more.
Between licenses and certifications, I mean,
Yeah, but still.
they're different. I mean, I'm just saying that, some certifications are good for life. I'm not saying this one should be one, but I'm not sure that these types of things change all that often.
That's what I think it depends, right? Is technology going to change, or is really the process of having a septic system and a septic field pretty much relatively standardized and not changed as much over the number of years? That'll impact your decision. Assessing is when they have to go every year, our assessors. That's because they are changing state law constantly, but they may not be with this. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that was impetus to Mr. Weed's point about guidelines, right? And that was working with our legal counsel at the county level about keeping some of this out of the regulation language and into the guidelines, so that we as a department can grow over the years and adjust that as we see is really what the need is, and not having to take that back to our full board every time we want to make an adjustment on some of those things.
Now, Mike, a township could choose to, or a municipality could choose to have a more restrictive policy as well, correct?
That language is in there, correct. So the autonomy of a township to have a more restrictive policy is an option for townships, right? And we would just ask that we start that conversation early with the county to determine what those objectives are to be, so that we can kind of weave them into kind of our workflow at the health department, because ultimately we are looking to build out an inspection program at the health department that we would look to kind of facilitate the two. So to your point, if, real estate entities or whatever they may be, township lines, are right there. So making sure we're all on the same page of what the expectations are to be. Because ultimately, we're going to have to educate the community on this regulation so that it becomes standard practice, because I don't have an office at the title company, nor does Mr. Wheat, right? So we'll have to start to educate the community on this requirement before a property can actually be transferred and that those titles can be signed.
The one issue that I've always had with inspection on transfer, is that there are many properties, and I think East Bay Township is a good example of one, where properties are held generationally in areas that are truly at risk for contamination of a septic system, meaning those small generational homes and cabins on the inland lakes. This doesn't really truly address that. So I think that's a challenge to East Bay and to our planning commission and our township board if we're satisfied with solely the county's time of transfer adoption, or if we want to look at something more. Also, for me, the struggle has always been no set criteria, right? So, like, when we were going through STRs, we looked to Kalkaska, right? So, as you mentioned before, we're a public entity. The great part about that is there's nothing proprietary. We can beg, borrow, and steal from every place where it's worked or not worked. So we looked to Kalkaska. But when we looked to Kalkaska, then there were other experts who were saying, no, they don't quite have that right. And we could not get a clear, concise direction on what that inspection should entail. So just some comments, not really a solution for us, but just a challenge, I think, to our collective boards.
I think it's a good reason why we're here today, too, right? Ultimately, it does boil down to, like, what are you looking to achieve in the regulation, right? So ultimately, we are a public health department, right? So I have to make sure that we are protecting the public health's interest in mind, right? So boiling down set criteria can sometimes be difficult if we're trying to regulate different things. Whereas I agree with you, now we can set forth universal requirements and criteria that is set forth to regulate these systems to ensure there's no leaching or contamination or those things. So again, I think we're going to grow through this too in this county, right? As I looked across, I mean, Macomb has a great model, but we're not Macomb County either, right? We're not Benzie Leelanau. So I think our board is very much open to hearing from us through the years as to what's working and what's not working, at least per that conversations I've had with them. And again, same goes to if there's interest to creating a more restrictive local ordinance at the township level. That conversation, we would prefer to be at it from the start at the township level so that we can offer what we've learned and so forth.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Mindy?
I have some big picture questions and some questions that Claire would tell me to talk to you later about them.
As long as it's not typos. Typos we'll keep for later.
So with regards to the definition of surface water, why didn't you use the Part 31 definition?
I don't know.
Was it probably that way in another ordinance?
We pulled several ordinances, Washtenaw and Macomb and others that use third-party inspectors. Benzie Leelanau, we pulled theirs. And so I'm sure that definition was probably a carryover from probably all of them. Most of them, what we noticed is Washtenaw was one of the first, and a lot of them used basically their ordinance and just pulled it through.
Because we've been talking about it for years, but because this was, pushed along a little bit by what the legislature was thinking about, I recommend that we go back to the Part 31 definition so that if they actually do get something passed, that you're already that much closer to already being right there with them. The other thing is on page 4 of the ordinance, you started talking about certified inspector, but that's not talked about at all until page 5. So either I recommend putting it in the definitions or something else. And then again, with the certified inspector on page 5, you're talking about registrations and certifications and then I can't say that word, revocation of certification. I just recommend adding a comma and put inspectors there so anybody looking at the title knows that this is talking about the inspectors and not anything else like that. And that's just my minor things that
Okay, well, thank you.
I appreciate you reading it in detail that much. And, yep, and again, tomorrow we are presenting a few edits to the draft that they had seen, so I can't predict yet how tomorrow will go, but we are open to continuous edits before we take it to a public hearing, if that's the determination tomorrow.
You can have my notes if you'd like them.
I think Mr. Weed will grab them on the way out.
Does anyone else have any other comments or questions? Matt?
Mine's pretty broad, or a couple of them are. Michigan's the only state without a statewide ordinance, is that correct?
Correct.
And part of the discussion, and you kind of hit it on tonight, was that the number of inspectors it would take to inspect everything on any kind of cycle is not there, and probably won't be there for a while. Okay.
Especially on the level that we want to do them, right? Ohio, for example, has a statewide sanitary code. We just hired one of their sanitarians not too long ago. He was doing those inspections. Literally, all he did was walk out to the property, walk over the drain field. If it wasn't mushy, he walked away. So, I mean, yeah, it's a statewide sanitary code, but.
Yeah, well,
Right.
it's just, it needs to happen just so we have it, because everybody else does, right? But that's not our problem tonight.
Right.
Okay. The only other comment I want to make is that we're talking water and sewer. And water and sewer is really should be the backbone of our zoning and planning that takes place. You know, if you read what it says right off the back, to protect public safety and public health. So as far as what I see here, I'm not going to get into the weeds. I'm no professional. I'll leave that up to you guys. But I've changed my thought over the years. I was one, back when we had the discussion before, I wasn't really in favor of it, because we heard from people that said, you know, there's just no regularity, you know, how it's done. Too many people were doing what you were saying, that, you know, so it was a waste of time in a sense. But it really needs to happen. If we don't protect our water from whatever we can do, and it's not going to be perfect, for God's sakes, we know it's not going to be perfect, but it needs to happen, or you can talk all you want about climate change, but if the water disappears, it doesn't matter, so.
Is that it, Matt?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Do you have how you were planning on phasing that in? And I'm sorry if I missed that piece of it, but you were doing time of sale now, and then what are you thinking in the future as you master levels have inspectors?
So right now, there's no intention to move from time of transfer right now. I say we would probably look to broaden the scope in terms of distance, potentially would be a good place to start, right? Maybe backing that up to 500. You know, we don't, as a health department, do active inspections, right? We are permitting for new systems that go into the ground, or permitting for the replacement of identified failed systems. That inspection programs, right, are, you know, in terms of public health and this work, they're rather young in age, right? So the data is currently kind of being put together in regards to how many systems are actually failed when you are inspecting them. Our peers, Benzie Leelanau, presented us with about 70, or what was it, 30%?
Pretty much all of them say that it's about 20 to 24% failure rate to start.
Right out of the gate, right? And then you start to move those through the inspection programs, and hopefully your numbers decrease over the years as your program builds. But I appreciated the comment about, you know, not getting it right out of the gate is okay, as long as there's no adverse impact on the community, and that is what is an objective of ours. But we haven't really talked in detail yet about what that next phase would look like. I would like some of the data to kind of drive that decision-making process.
I tell you, I'd be very interested in planning commission and township boards' feedback on the fact that, you know, maybe right off the bat, it's, you know, the township, obviously we would fall under this with the county, but that at some point, particularly after you've had a year, maybe two under your belt, that even as a township, if the county doesn't move forward, that we move forward in doing something more than just time of sale, that we look at properties that are waterfront, for an inspection on some type of a frequency. But I don't know if there's tolerance for that with, again, rest of the boards and commissions, so.
Thank you for that, Beth. I was going to ask, I think the next step, as you mentioned, we're missing those generational cottages, those old cottages, that have a septic system that's a couple 50-gallon, barrels.
Yep.
Which is how I bought my place. That's exactly what it was.
And new homes, Rhonda, where owners live downstate and aren't used to living on a septic field. And so they're used to being on municipal water and sewer, and everything goes down the drain, and they've ruined a system in a very short period of time.
I think that's an important piece, right? Education is part of the front end of this that we see, right? We get that question all the time from a new homeowner when we say their on-site wastewater system, and they say, my what? They may not just be familiar with, you flush the toilet, it goes down to the sewer. No, it goes to your front yard actually now. Very much open, I don't know which way our board's going to go, to your point, right? But if it doesn't pass or it's not recommended to move forward, I would say, I don't think the conversation's going away at that point. I think this is going to be a continuous thing. And we would be open to partnering at the local health department to try to figure out some of that language if need be.
That 20, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, there's Torch Lake Township, I think, has a really good ordinance for us to take a look at. And they have kind of twofold, so they do the inspection at time of transfer, but they're also systematically inspecting all of the properties that are adjacent to water. And so it's not necessarily a certain time interval, but they're basically going through the entire township. And so I think that this could be a really good opportunity where the county rolls out their system, so they have the inspection process, they have the certification, they have all that infrastructure in place, and then the township could work with the county and add something additional where we have an ordinance where we're systematically going through every single one of those systems. And, I think that there could be some challenges to certain frequency, but I think that you can make a huge impact if you, starting at year one, systematically, however long it takes, go through and inspect every single one of those systems.
Mike or Brent, of the 25-ish% that fail, would there be any stats on how many have actually because the system could fail and not yet have leached or contaminated it to something. Is there any stats on that percentage that have contaminated or leached of that? Okay.
That's the hard part, and I know we're going to get that question tomorrow as well, right? Not yet, right? And that's what I mean, where we don't know in our county because we haven't been looking for that per se, right? We haven't been actively inspecting and regulating systems. We've been permitting them, right? My hunch is there's a ton of undocumented exposure to out there, likely. You're at the lake, you're eating and drinking, and then you swim all day, and then you don't feel well the next day. A number of reasons could be the factor there, but I live on a lake too, so I'm very familiar when you're driving around on the boat, when you see a green Menards bucket in the backyard, what that might mean, right? Someone may have a failing system that they're trying to take care of on their own. But an intention of this is for us to be able to start putting that data together about what may be leaching into surface water. But I don't know if we have a public health system in place to actively monitor that exposure to that results in disease, illness, if that makes sense, right? Because I think so much of it is probably underreported, likely.
Sure. Okay. Any other further questions? Otherwise, we'll just kind of talk about a step or two forward. Okay, well, good luck with your meeting tomorrow. And then we'll have Claire, talk with the Planning Commission as she does with her staff reports on any steps that we might move forward. We'll be talking with Mike and Brent administratively to see where this might go and kind of lining up that timing. Again, this is a good step to watch you guys walk through it first and then potentially building on it if there is that desire to do so with East Bay.
And again, tomorrow, 9 a.m., public comment on the front end, back end of that as well. And also just kind of put a plug in there that if approved and go down that, when it comes to guidelines, we would like to bring partners into the room as we draft those. So township input, private industry input. We're going to be we would be setting up opportunities to have collaborative sessions there to garner input on that before we roll out guidelines as a department. So thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your meeting and have a good evening.
Thank you, you
Yep.
too.
First step.
Okay, with that, we'll move to the update on trail planning and funding. Claire?
So we just wanted to provide you with a quick update on the trail effort, both 3 Mile Trail and Safe Routes to School. I know there's been a lot of different kind of moving pieces. A lot of it is contingent on the funding. We've kind of completed the planning, but the funding is the big challenge right now. So just wanted to update you that East Bay Township submitted a grant request for just shy of $800,000 to MEDC end of January, and that would basically cover the gap funding for the Safe Routes to School trail system. So just as a refresher, the township has received $1.5 million from Safe Routes to School. And we have also received $50,000 from Olson Foundation. We are just kind of working through the gap funding. We just recently were alerted of an opportunity through Rotary Charities to apply for a $50,000 additional gap funding for Safe Routes to School. It's called the Assets for Thriving Communities Grant. And so TART was in discussions with Rotary. They decided that East Bay Township with Safe Routes would probably be a better applicant than TART through the 3 Mile Trail. So they got in touch with us yesterday, and so we do apologize for the delay in providing these resolutions for you, but in front of you is a resolution of support for a $50,000 grant application to Rotary Charities through the Assets for Thriving Communities to support the Safe Routes to School effort. And so same overall scope as what you've reviewed in the past, but it's really just been kind of the trail system hasn't changed, but just the construction costs have gone up over the last several years. We submitted the grant application in 2020. We received the conditional commitment in 2021, so there's been huge changes since then. You'll see in your packet with the 3 Mile Trail, the updated map is here. The township was awarded that $400,000 grant from the Michigan Trust Fund. And so we're going to be building out next year segment 1, which is the first 0.4 miles plus the parking lot, with the plan to continue that all the way south to Hammond Road. And then Sam put together this more detailed map of the Safe Routes to School infrastructure, and you can see a little bit more information on the proposed lighting, sidewalks, trails, crossing locations. And also just wanted to, I know we've talked about the Civic Plaza that we've been kind of working with Planning Commission on, and have secured easement and approval from True North, generously donated that to the township pending successful grant funding. But you can see kind of a rendering as well as a site plan for the Civic Plaza that would include some informational signage, as well as bike racks, bike fix-it station.
Just go ahead and open it there.
Yeah, kind of think of what you see at the open space along the TART trail, just kind of like a nice seating area, public gathering place for people to stop and take a break along the TART trail. So just wanted to share that with you. The wrap grant application that we submitted to MEDC would cover the cost of the Civic Plaza as well as the, some of the placemaking amenities along the TART trail, the lighting, the landscaping, as well as the gap funding for the trail. But before you tonight is the resolution of support. There's one for Planning Commission that would be making a recommendation to Township Board to support the application, and then there's a resolution for Township Board making the support to submit that. And the reason that we have a quick turnaround is the grant is due March 3rd, so we don't have any more board or planning commission meetings coming up before that deadline.
It's been pretty quick.
That we had tonight.
Indeed. With that, let's first see if there are questions and comments from both entities, and then we'll look at the resolutions. And I think what we'll do is, because typically the resolution would go to the planning commission first, so we'll have them consider that, and then we'll do the board's consideration of it. But comments, questions on the trail, whether it's 3 Mile or Safe Routes to School, and some of the funding and grants that Claire had mentioned. We have had, again, a lot of information of this through months. These take a long time to do, especially, it's a lot of infrastructure, and we haven't really had trails through here. So we're covering a lot of ground with these 2 projects, especially when you add in the Live AE portion. That will be done through the brownfield, well, through the township, but reimbursed through the brownfield. If there's no comments and questions, then does the Planning Commission have any thoughts on the resolution? And this would be
Roll call vote.
resolution 2?
Did I
make
hear
a motion.
from Rhonda?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Motion to approve resolution PC 2025-2.
Support. Thank you. Any questions on the motion? Ann, can we get a roll call vote, please? Thank you.
Yes.
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 Walter says yes, too.
Oh, Walter, yeah, you're both. Okay.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments, questions, discussion on the resolution, or is there a motion from the Township Board? I do not have the number on this, but we will just number it the next sequential number. I think we're at
it's
3. Yeah, I don't think we had 1 the first month. I think we only had 1 last month. So we will name it 3 and
To be confirmed.
to be confirmed, right? And if it's not accurate, we will change that number.
I think it's number 3, because last time.
Oh, great, we have the minutes there. Sure. There you go.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2025-3, Rotary Assets for Thriving Communities, Safe Routes to School, and 3 Mile Trail.
Is there support? Okay, there's a motion by Walters and support by Bartlett. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Ann?
Walters,
Yes.
Bartlett,
Yes.
M. Corte,
No.
Brian.
Yes. Okay, very good, thank you. Anything else to wrap up with the trails, Claire? There wasn't really any other questions or anything, so.
I think that's it, and we will come back, obviously, to the boards pending any successful grant awards, but
Sure.
thank you.
Sounds good, thank you. This is an opportunity for public comment, so this is our second opportunity for public comment. If anyone has one, feel free to step up to the podium. Hello, how are you?
Good, thanks. Jill Bernardi from Rainy View Road. Everything you're doing tonight, I support fully, and I'm very thankful of. I have one comment or question regarding the septics. It may be accurate, it may be not, but it's something I want you all to know and make sure we find out. I believe that you don't have to be certified to install a septic system. I don't know if anyone knows if I'm right or wrong, but I'm pretty certain. So I think that might be something that should be looked at for the installers, to have some kind of criteria certification or something. So just kind of a seed to plant there. I don't see anyone nodding one way or another, so I don't know if we know the answer.
Expertise left, so.
Yeah, I wanted to go out there. I have a property that's affected by both of the issues this evening. So I have two properties. One thing about the septics, I just went through, in the Lakes area, with a non-conforming house, I just went through a nightmare of 2 years to get a new septic field put in. Part of it was due to the lack of people out there in order to do them and how busy they are. But most of it was due to the complications that the small lots on our lakes areas present when you don't have a record of the old system. The neighbor's system isn't on paper. So where do you put the septic? Where do you put the well? Well, it has to be 50 feet away. It becomes pretty complicated. So that's something, as you're going forward, also to just be cognizant of, because I voluntarily spent $38,000 to put in the first septic system that at least Faith had seen or done, new type of septic system, in order to fit on a smaller lot and still perform properly. And I mean, you're going to get pushback. I know there's people that don't remodel because they don't want to have to redo their septic. Meanwhile, it's floating. So just kind of a heads up, those things do exist in that area, which I know you're addressing. And just as you go down this path, be cognizant of the difficulties, the expense, and the ongoing technology that is out there, that is available for smaller lots. But the inspections probably need to happen more often because of that. And as far as the transfer of sale, I did purchase a home that was from a generational family. And because of that, that caused so much difficulty in learning where to put things. For sale by owners, be very careful, be involved in this. A for sale by owner could potentially skip a lot of that paperwork. I was fortunate enough that I caught it and negotiated the day of closing, but for sale by owners could very easily slip through this. So again, think through that as well. And that's all. Thanks so much for what you're doing, and just a couple things to plant seeds as you all start to tackle this thing, because it's not easy. Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you. You as well. Any further public comment? Okay, seeing none, we do have your regular Planning Commission meeting is coming up on March 4th, and the regular Township Board meeting on March 10th. Thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. It's hard to get a joint meeting together, and so we appreciate it. Everybody, if there's no objection, we stand adjourned. Have a good evening. Drive safely. Our buildings and grounds guy has been trying to keep up with the snow, but it's, provided some challenges recently.